Welcome to 3 Minutes of History. I'm your future history teacher, Chris Oxenford, and let's get started.
May 16th, 1868. The United States Senate is voting on the impeachment charges against the 17th President of the United States, Andrew Johnson. Tensions are running high. 6 Republican senators have already voted against the bill. The decision has come down to Senator Edmund G. Ross of Kansas. Ross was appointed to fill the Senate seat of Senator James H. Lane, who committed suicide in 1866. Ross himself has been threatened with an investigation if he does not vote to convict Andrew Johnson. How did it come down to this? How did the 17th President of the United States find himself facing impeachment charges just 3 years after the end of the Civil War? Johnson's road to the presidency was an unlikely one. A successful tailor in East Tennessee, he was elected to the House of Representatives in 1843, governor of Tennessee in 1853, and to the United States Senate in 1857. When Tennessee seceded from the Union in 1861, Johnson remained loyal to the United States. Because he was a Democrat and a Southerner, and because he had supported the North during the Civil War, Johnson was considered as a running mate for Abraham Lincoln. In November 1864, Lincoln and Johnson won an overwhelming landslide, and Lincoln was re-elected as president. April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. Johnson would be sworn in as president between 10 and 11 a.m. On ascending to the presidency, Johnson faced an enormous task. The South had been politically and economically devastated as a result of the Civil War and needed to be reconstructed and reintegrated into the Union. Johnson had 3 goals. The first was a speedy reintegration of the Southern states back into the United States. The second was the breaking of what he called the planter class, the large landowners and majority slaveholders who had brought the South out of the Union in 1861, and finally achieving his own re-election in 1868. When Congress returned in December 1865, it was unhappy with Johnson's unwillingness to advance the cause of the Freedmen. Illinois Senator Lyman Turnbull, a moderate Republican and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, passed 2 bills that were designed to help these former slaves. The first extended the existence of the Freedmen's Bureau, past 1867, and the second granted citizenship and voting rights to the freedmen. On February 18, 1866, Johnson vetoed the Freedmen's Bill. Worse, during a speech on Washington's birthday, February 22, 1866, Johnson denounced men who were, quote, still opposed to the Union, including Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, and abolitionist Wendell Phillips, and accused them of plotting his assassination. Congressional Republicans viewed Johnson's statements as a declaration of war. In response, Congress passed the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment wrote the provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 into the Constitution. It extended citizenship to all persons born in the United States, penalized states that did not give the vote to freedmen, and most importantly created new civil rights that could be protected by federal courts. It also disqualified many former Confederate officers from office. In response to these actions, Johnson announced the Swing Around the Circle, a political speaking tour designed to help his supporters win congressional seats in the election of 1866. The swing around the circle would prove politically disastrous for Johnson. Johnson made several comparisons between himself and Jesus Christ. He also continued to denounce Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, and Wendell Phillips, calling for them to be hanged. The radical Republicans would win 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress. From that point on, they were driving Reconstruction. In January 1867, Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, one of Johnson's leading antagonists, introduced legislation to dissolve the southern state governments and reconstitute them into 5 military districts. Johnson attempted to work out a compromise, but Congressman Stevens would have none of it. So, on March 2, 1867, Johnson vetoed the first Reconstruction Act. That same day, Congress overrode his veto. At the same time, it passed the Tenure of Office Act. The Tenure of Office Act required that any appointee who needed congressional approval to receive their office also needed it to be fired from that office. It was the Tenure of Office Act that would be the primary cause behind Johnson's impeachment. Throughout 1867, Johnson and Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, who supported the radical Reconstruction, had clashed on multiple occasions. During the congressional recess, Johnson attempted to dismiss Stanton from office. When Congress returned, they overturned Stanton's dismissal and held him in office. In response, Johnson fired him. Stanton refused to leave his office, barricading himself in, and on February 24, 1868, the House impeached the president for intentionally violating the Tenure of Office Act by a vote of 128 to 47. Johnson's Senate trial began on March 5, 1868, and lasted for almost 3 months. Chief Justice Simon Chase presided over the proceedings. Johnson's defense relied on the unconstitutionality of the Tenure of Office Act and his right to challenge it. Johnson's counsel insisted that he make no public appearance at the trial, nor publicly comment on the proceedings. By the time the trial concluded on May 16, 1868, most people believed that Johnson would be acquitted. 6 Republican senators had already voted against Johnson's conviction, which probably made Senator Ross's decision easier on May 16, 1868. Ross also voted to acquit Johnson, and thus the president was acquitted. Congress ultimately relented and allowed Secretary Stanton to be dismissed. However, Johnson would not be reelected in 1868. Instead, he would be succeeded by Ulysses S. Grant. Senator Ross would also lose his reelection in 1871, largely because of his vote to acquit President Johnson.
This has been 3 Minutes of History. I'm Chris Oxenford. Thank you for joining me.